Our desire was always to have like a big 10-year anniversary trip. COVID, and no offense to our son Noah, kind of changed those plans, but we were able to get a little bit of time together last on Friday to enjoy ourselves together and kind of have a date lunch, so kind of a date afternoon. But thank you all for the best wishes to Danielle. Thank you for um, putting up with me for 10 years married and 15 plus more since then. I love you so much and could not imagine my life without you. If you haven't read it, Danielle put a much better, more eloquent kind of congratulations or happy anniversary on her page than I did. And if you haven't read it, I'd highly suggest reading it. It was just a wonderful tribute to our marriage. And so, she did a great job writing it. Today we're going to start on chapter 13. Um, this was one that kind of in preparing for it, I struggled with this chapter. Um, Frankly, want to skip the chapter and because of the subject matter. But I sort of I feel like we have to cover it. It's there. We have to approach it and we have to discuss it. Um, and so we're going to go through it. This chapter will start a sequence of events that we'll see over the next six chapters. And so this is pretty substantial in the book as we go. So if we start, we're going to cover all of chapter 13. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had an adviser named Jonadab, son of Shemiah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to him, Amnon said, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand." David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, and made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. "Send everyone out of here," Amnon said, so everyone left. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." "No, my brother," she said to him, "don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her." So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon your brother been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When King David heard all this, he was furious. And Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he disgraced his sister Tamar. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal-hazor, near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. And Absalom went to the king and said, "Your servant has had shearers come. Will the king and his attendants please join me?" "No, my son," the king replied, "all of us should not go. We would only be a burden to you." Although Absalom urged him, he still refused to go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon come with us." The king asked him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom urged him, so he sent with him Amnon and the rest of the king's sons. Absalom ordered his men, "Listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, I say to you, strike down Amnon and then kill him. Don't be afraid. Haven't I given you this order? Be strong and brave." So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. Then all the king's sons got up, mounted their mules, and fled. While they were on their way, the report came to David, "Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, not one of them is left." The king stood up, tore his clothes, and lay on the ground, and all his attendants stood by their clothes torn. But Jonadab, son of Shimea, David's brother, said, "My lord should not think that they killed all the princes. Only Amnon is dead. This has been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar. My lord the king should not be concerned about the report that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead." Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. Now the man standing watch looked up and saw many people on the road west of him, coming down the side of the hill. The watchman went and told the king, "I see men in the direction of Horonaim on the side of the hill." Jonadab said to the king, "See, the king's sons have come. It has happened just as your servant said." As he finished speaking, the king's sons came in wailing loudly. The king too and all his attendants wept very bitterly. Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Amminadab, the king of Geshur. But King David mourned many days for his son. After Absalom fled and went to Geshur, he stayed there 3 years. And David longed to go see Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. So this is like I said, this is a hard one to cover, and probably honestly, now having a kid, having a daughter, it makes it harder. But what we see here is we see Amnon, who is the firstborn son of David, one of many, many, many children, but the firstborn. Let the significance of that also not be lost on you. Is in love or in lust, maybe would be the better term, with Tamar, who is the sister of Absalom, the third son of David. And he becomes obsessed, and he becomes so obsessed that he made himself ill, that almost the desire hurt him. And he felt like he could do absolutely nothing. And in this mood, in this mindset, he goes to a cousin of his, and the cousin, being shrewd, says, "Here's what you do: pretend to be ill, get her in the same room with you, and you can have her." And his obsession is so strong that he actually thinks this is a good idea. And so he goes about this whole process and pretends to be ill, and his father, the king, comes to him, and he says, "Let Tamar bring the food and feed it in my sight and help me." And David, either unaware or so in love with his son, gives him his wish at this point in time. And what we see here is during this period, he takes Tamar and rapes her. And even Tamar at the time, even as she's fighting with Amnon, she's saying, "Don't do this. I'm a virgin. You will ruin my life if you do this. At minimum, let's go to the king. He will let us be married." And that's likely very true at this time. The idea of a brother marrying a sister back in the days of kings and queens was not odd. So this would not have been really that shocking of an idea. But he is so obsessed with her that he cannot even go about doing that. He cannot wait. He is so obsessed, and he rapes her there. And at the moment that he's done, it says he's filled with the hate, and hates her more than he had loved her the first time, and he pushes her out and bolts the door behind her and leaves her, ripping her clothes and in mourning, going back to her brother's house in tears and in bitterness, and is left, as they say in the scripture, a desolate woman. Now, this is rough to talk about. I say it's hard to talk about. We're going to stop with the story right there and talk about Amnon and what in the world is going on here. Um, the key point is there's a couple key points, but first off, he was obsessed. Um, and all of us, to varying degrees, I am sure, can think of times where we've been obsessed with something. And probably, and I think it's natural, that we've all had that thing that at times we've been so obsessed with, um, that it becomes that it would make us ill. Now, the obsession probably has varying degrees of good or bad in and of itself, but the obsession itself is a problem. Um, but the type of obsession can cause damage in varying ways. Um, a pretty what I would call a generally benign obsession, like just in my life, and like I said, I'm being careful with the obsessions that I personally had, but since I was in high school and going through college, um, I was obsessed with my career. In particular, I wanted to be a CPA. I wanted to be a certified public accountant because that's sort of like the bread and butter. That's the top thing to be in in accounting, right? That is the goal. And Danielle can attest to this while we weren't married at the time, but when I was testing for the CPA, all I did, if I wasn't working and if I wasn't sleeping, I was studying for that doggone test. There's sort of a joke in our family. One of my favorite things to do is ironing, and if that sounds odd, the reason is because when I was studying for this exam, the only time that I really allowed myself to watch TV and not study was when I was doing my laundry, when I was ironing my dress clothes for work the next week. That's how obsessed I was with passing this test because I wanted that. I wanted those letters. I wanted that status. Um, it, it 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 took over all obsession. Now I'm still proud of my license. I'm proud to say I have it. But does it have that level of obsession now that I have it? No. Now I don't hate it like what happened with Amnon. But that obsession. I wonder how many moments early in my life, early in my career, how many moments of enjoyment in that kind of early 20s, how many things that I missed that I would have really enjoyed being part of back then. So that's a very benign obsession, but I obsessed over almost to the point where it hurt at times. It was a true obsession, and I've had other great obsessions. We're not going to go into all the various obsessions I've had in my life, but that's one that it really took over and tunnel visioned myself in there. Obsessions are there's not really maybe other than our obsession for God, there's not really an obsession out there that's good. It causes us to have blinders in a way that we do it. And obsession itself is an emotion that can branch off into other emotions. I got a feeling that in this case, Amnon had emotions of fear that Tamar would marry somebody, jealousy if Tamar ever even probably looked at another person that she that he thought maybe she was flirting with. Um, he was likely angry at people because he couldn't have something he wanted. He was probably mad at his dad that he had set them up as a marriage. He was probably mad at Absalom because he probably thought maybe he was in some way holding her back. This obsessions like this create an attitude that is completely and utterly unreasonable, as we see with what the end results here are. There's no reason for his attitude, no rational reason. It is purely created by an obsession. And so when we have those obsessions, what are we supposed to do? I think that's a good question to stop and ask. Well, what do we do in this case? Because anyone who's had an obsession like this knows um, it's not easily, it's hard to talk yourself off that cliff. That it sinks almost to your soul in a desire, and that's something that is hard to get rid of if you can even get rid of it. And in some ways, maybe you're best at just trying to manage it. So the first thing that as I see here is sometimes we all need someone um, in our life that is an honest, upright person that we can go to help talk us off the cliff. That can be rational for us and help us. to see where we're wrong. We need, if you've ever heard the term, an accountability partner. That's what we need. And to be honest, it can be, you can have more than one accountability partner. In other words, you can have people who are sort of your accountability partner for different parts of your life, where you feel like they're the best person suited to help you in that particular point. Um, and I said, obviously, Danielle for me is one of my best accountability partners, especially actually as it relates to sometimes being over ambitious about things and just overwhelming myself because I want to do everything. Um, she's good at helping me to rationalize myself and kind of talk me down and make sure to remember the important things in life. But we all need accountability partners, and here we actually see he gets the opposite. He gets a person that doesn't hold him accountable, but actually a person that puts gas on the fire and says, "Oh, you really want this?" He doesn't say, "Listen, this is a really bad idea. We need to walk you through this. We need to find a way to curtail this and move this and move you down a different path." We see a person who actually says, "Hey, if this is what your obsession is, here's what you do," and gives him this plan. I want to compare and contrast this with Nathan, the prophet Nathan, in the earlier chapters. Think about what Nathan does with David. At various points in time, Nathan calls him out and says, "You were wrong here, or don't do this." Even though he is the king of Israel and had full right to probably execute Nathan for talking against him. Nathan was kind of a good accountability partner for David at various points in time. Um, the Jonadab was not for for Amnon. And so probably the first thing is we have to find someone to help us to be accountable. In addition, we also need to try as best we can, especially because emotions can be good. We see times where Jesus is very passionate and emotional, and those are good times. But we also got to understand that our emotions can well ourselves up till we lose the rational. And this is a place where his emotion overwhelms him. And when that happens, we need to try and pull ourselves back a little bit and try and see. And we need to try and take as best understanding of what our emotions are as we can, so that we can understand when our emotions are taking us well beyond where they should. One of the things he needed to do is he needed to find an outlet somewhere else. He needed to find something else to put his interest in. He probably needed to move. If he is near Tamar, he needed to get away from Tamar. Get out of town. Get to somewhere else. He needed to find something else and get away from this, because the longer he likely stayed in the palace and stayed near Tamar and stayed in this area, the worse it was going to get. And probably the best thing he should have said was, "I need to leave here and I need to go somewhere else. I need to, goodness knows he is a king of, he's one of the kings. He's the firstborn king of Israel. If he said, 'Listen, I want to be out with the troops and the army and I want to command them,' or I want to be on a different estate somewhere, take some time away," he could have likely done that and been calmed himself down off the cliff. Um, he also needed to just, like I said, as I was saying, with those emotions, he needed to address them. He needed to acknowledge that he had it so that he could fight it, but he didn't. Or he might have acknowledged it, but he didn't see that it was something wrong at the time. And so as we talk about what happened, and so he didn't do any of those things. And as a result, he raped Tamar. He left her desolate. Let's be brutally honest about the culture. Our culture at this time, even culture as we are, and I believe we're better off now and more aware than we are now. But even now today, when a woman is raped, we're still not to where we should be in compassion and understanding is what we should. Let's just be brutally honest about that. We're not. And a lot of times we do a lot of rationalizing of why it happened. That's not correct. If that's the way we are today, and I think we're more aware and understanding now than we are, how much worse was it back then? This is something that likely they considered as much her fault as Amnon's. And given the fact that nobody was in the room with them, who knows what Amnon said? And they were more likely to believe him because he's a male and because he's the firstborn king of Israel, or firstborn king of David, likely the heir to the throne of Israel. They're much more likely to believe him than they ever to believe her. So he leaves her ruined in this. In addition to this, he's now he's in some ways ruined Absalom's life. Can you imagine how he felt about this? he's also, let's just be clear, if we do a little bit of looking towards the future here, this is the start of Absalom going down a path that's going to lead to a civil war in Israel. I don't think I ever seen in the scripture where they call it a civil war, but that's what it is. And we're going to see that over the next couple chapters. So this starts a whole course of events. He's the worst one is he has ruined Tamar's life. And like I said, to say she's left a desolate woman, I think underemphasizes how bad it was for her at this point in time, or for the rest of her life. He ruined her life, all because of an obsession that he didn't think about, rationalize, get away from, and because he had people around him that frankly encouraged him. He had no one to keep him accountable, and so he does this. And so now let's talk about the effects of what happens from here. As I've said, and I'm going to say it several times because it should be emphasized. He's ruined Tamar's life. He's now created a absolute enemy of Absalom, the third born, and according to some historians, who's considered the favorite of David, who's likely just as likely to receive the throne as what Amnon is. Absalom waits 2 years in thinking of an obsession. He holds his obsession in for 2 years, hating Amnon, and holds on to it. And what we see here is after 2 years, he builds up his plan, and he gets Amnon out and actually kills him. Kills Amnon for this. And gets his revenge with Amnon's life. I will be very honest. The rational side of me wants to say that it's wrong to kill in revenge. The father in me, frankly, wants to look at Absalom and say, "Good for you," because if this happened to my daughter, who knows? And I think any one of us who have a kid would probably feel the way. I said that's how emotionally obsessed this type of issue becomes for us. That's how emotional this gets. But he waits 2 years, and in that hate, kills Amnon, and has to flee Israel because he's afraid that he's going to be arrested or executed by David. A couple things as we close today that I also want you to think about as we go here, things of where things have gone wrong here beyond just the rape. Is it looks like David, at least from what we're told, David is silent about this rape. David doesn't do anything to Amnon. And we know that because he lives for 2 years, and it doesn't look like he's punished for what he did. So it makes me believe that either David had too much blinders for Amnon, being his firstborn son, he didn't believe it, refused to listen to it, or just was not strong enough to address the issue that was within his own palace, within his own household. But whatever it is, he did nothing. And that nothing is also a horrible answer to this crime. And what it results in is Absalom, first off, killing Amnon. That's bad. Furthermore, then Absalom leaves Israel. That's bad. And then the thing that probably makes it worse is during this time, and it doesn't say this here, and it doesn't really say it in the scriptures later on explicitly, but it appears that it's this event and David's inaction after it that results in Absalom having no confidence or maybe even some hate for his own father. Because what we will see next, and what we're going to talk about over the next 6 chapters, is Absalom's going to leave, come back, and eventually he's going to go to Hebron. And if you remember, Hebron's the first place where David ruled. He's going to go to Hebron and declare himself the king of Israel. And he's going to essentially put his father in banishment, and he's going to start a civil war. And if I'm going to take a guess, even though it's not, as far as I can tell, it's not exclusively said in these chapters, from what I can tell, this is the catalyst. It is what Amnon did, that rape, and the fact that either David didn't prevent it, because remember, David's the one that sent Tamar to Amnon in the first place, and the fact that afterwards he did nothing about it. And so what we see here is when this wrong was done, there was no action. And I think that's also something important for us to remember is when we see wrongs, especially visceral wrongs like we hear, we don't have the ability to sit there and do nothing. I don't know if anyone's heard about the news lately, but from a relative standpoint, there's been an article, there's been a news report going around. There was a woman actually raped on a subway in Philly, um, and passengers were literally around as it was happening. A sexual assault was happening, a rape was happening, and literally no one on the train did a single thing to try and break it up. Whether that's out of fear, whether that's out of whatever reason, inaction was done. And the one thing that we should understand, one thing that Jesus made sure that to show is that when there is a wrong being done, when there is not an excuse for inaction, and what we see here is that there wasn't an excuse for David's inaction as well. We have an obligation when we see wrong to try and prevent it, try and correct it, or go to the authorities, go and start the process to make sure that the person is punished for what it is. Now, we should not take justice into our own hands the way Absalom did. As much as our desire might be, especially in the case of something like this, something like a rape of a sister or a daughter or something else, our first desire will be to take vengeance in our own hands. It's not our right. We don't have that right. Absalom didn't have the right to that, but we do have to start the process to get justice in that moment. And we, like I said, as Absalom was wrong to kill, but David was wrong to do nothing. There's so many wrongs with this, and what we see is this whole mess of a chapter, this horrible event, and the things that happen from it are going to lead to a catastrophic, historically changing events in Israel as we go forward. And so as we finish today, we need to remember, one, we don't have the right to inaction. Two, we don't have the right to obsess and heed that obsession. We need to find accountability partners. We need to be mindful of our own emotions. We need to stop and be rational about what we're doing here. We have a mind. A lot of times as Christians, we talk in romantic terms of passion and emotion. But remember, God gave us a heart as He also gave us a brain. And sometimes the brain's job is to stop us and help us be rational, to pull us away from when our emotions go and overwhelm us. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this lesson, as hard as it is. The hard ones are the ones we frankly need the most. And so thank you for letting us read this and try and learn from it. Help us to first off, to keep our emotions, keep our obsessions in check. Find someone to help us. Help us to help ourselves by being mindful of what our emotions are, and help us find ways to move away and to calm ourselves. At the same time, also, when we see wrongs in this world, do not let us be silent. Do not let us be a person that walks away from it. Do not let us be like the people in the story of the Good Samaritan who saw the person in trouble and just kept going for no good reason. Help us to be people of action. When we see wrong, try and help bring justice, not take justice into our own hands, but to take and help to see that justice is done. We ask for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you guys again for today. By way of announcements, please remember we will be back online again next week at 6 o'clock. Church is always, you can always go to church at 10:45. You're more than welcome. We hope that we will see you there. If you're still, because of COVID, cautious, or if you live far enough away, or you go to another church, please watch us online. Either watch us live, watch us later on after it gets online recorded. We're on YouTube, Facebook. Please come there. And also remember, we have Wednesday services, the Quest, good discipleship program. If you have kids, they have some great kid programs. I just highly suggest you also go to that if you feel comfortable. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and hope to see you again next week.